Welcome back. On this day in history, November 21st, but in the year 1789, my native state, North Carolina, became the 12th of the 13 to ratify the United States Constitution. Now, as it turned out, by the rules of the Constitution, only 9 states had to ratify it for the Constitution to take effect. New Hampshire, the 9th state to do so in 1788. And in May of 1790, Rhode Island voted by just a 2-vote margin to ratify the document, and in so doing became the last of the original 13 colonies to join the United States. Today, our Constitution ranks as the oldest written governing document anywhere in the world. It's also the subject of tonight's Let Freedom Ring. Here's Callista Gingrich.
In 1777, while fighting the American Revolution, our founding fathers created the Articles of Confederation, the first set of basic laws to govern the new nation. But the Articles of Confederation soon proved to be unworkable. The national government was weak. There was no presidency, no judiciary, and only one chamber of Congress. In addition, the Articles of Confederation did not clearly define the relationship of the states to the federal government. In 1787, to prepare for a constitutional convention in Philadelphia, a young Virginian named James Madison studied classical governments and philosophers. Madison wanted to create a new republic, one that would endure through the ages. In May of 1787, the United States Constitutional Convention convened in Philadelphia. Madison's outline for a new government was bold. It was based on 3 branches of power: executive, judicial, and legislative, consisting of 2 chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate. Over the next 4 months, the founders debated how to divide power between the federal and state governments. Advocates of a strong federal government became known as Federalists. The federal government would have specific, limited powers, so-called enumerated powers, with all remaining powers reserved for the states and for the people. The first 3 words of the preamble make clear the source of all constitutional power. We the people will govern the nation, not a king and not a dictator. Today, our United States Constitution remains the oldest federal constitution in the world. I'm Callista Gingrich, and this is Let Freedom Ring on Newsmax TV.
And from a look at our history in terms of our nation, let's talk about what is happening in the world in terms of current events and how America relates to, I don't know, since we have Daniel Silke here, maybe South Africa. Daniel Silke of the Political Futures Consultancy from Cape Town, South Africa, here to our national anchor desk at Newsmax TV. It's a pleasure to have you back.
Terrific to be here again.
Well, tell us, the view from South Africa of our recent presidential election here in the United States?
Well, I can tell you something. South Africans have been entertained by what's been going on in the United States. They have watched it very closely, and it is really dinner table conversation, or has been, for the better part of the last year or 18 months. There's a fascination. Look, you must remember, South Africans have been exposed to Donald Trump through The Apprentice. So we certainly were familiar with Mr. Trump, other than his business acumen. And I think for most South Africans, they've been amused, they've been bemused by your entertaining election. I think they're a little concerned, though, clearly from afar, to see what kind of foreign policy will President-elect Trump implement, and especially on issues of trade, because ultimately for South Africans, or for any country around the world, it's what's in it for us. Doesn't really matter necessarily who the personality is who's elected, but what's in it for us, and how can we do better business, or will our business be affected negatively with a new president? I think that's the issue of concern.
And back home for you, there have been some challenges. For example, the finance minister of South Africa being accused of fraud, and there is talk of a downgrade from Standards & Poor's. How did South Africa end up in this crisis?
Well, South Africa has had a weak economy for some time. Our GDP growth this year will be 0.5%, which is simply not good enough for an emerging economy like ours. The economy is weak, but we have a high degree of political factionalism coming from our governing or ruling political party, the African National Congress. There is a desire, I think, by some to unseat our sitting president, President Zuma, before his term of office ends. And these factions and competing elites are vying for power now within South Africa. It involves all the agencies of the state, and even the finance minister is not out of the fray in terms of his own personal job security.
So if I hear you correctly, the one thing we know, the interaction of politics and the economy, markets hate uncertainty. And when everything is churning and there is uncertainty, that leads to a challenge.
Well, that's right. There's a double whammy when you've got political uncertainty and you've got economic uncertainty. Sometimes politics drives economics, and sometimes economic uncertainty or decline drives politics. And in South Africa today, interestingly enough, it's this continued economic decline that we have had, which is putting pressure on our political leadership to change. And that, in part, is contributing to the political firmament within the country.
And it is a challenge not only within the boundaries and the borders of South Africa, but all across the sub-Saharan continent. As a matter of fact, one of the World Bank Group chief economists for the Africa region, Albert Zufak, had this point of view about it. Let's look and listen.
This sharp decline in aggregate growth reflects the challenging conditions in three of the largest economies in Africa: Nigeria, South Africa, Angola, as these countries are facing strong headwinds from the decline in commodity prices, the tightening of financing conditions, and policy uncertainties at home.
So only about a minute left. We think about Nigeria and the oil there. Kind of give us the overview, if you had to prioritize, not continent-wide, but for South Africa. How would you set your priorities now heading into a new year?
Well, South Africa must be less reliant upon commodities and what she extracts from the ground, and she must have very, very good policies to encourage foreign direct investment. We've got to diversify our economy. Diversification is critical for South Africa to not fall into the trap of the Nigerias and the Angolas. And I think once we get that right, it'll put us on a better footing into the future.
Before I let you go, the biggest surprise Americans would find in South Africa?
Gleaming shopping malls, the arrival of some of your biggest fast food outlets that are expanding across the world, looking for emerging market customers like ours, a highly sophisticated economy, and I think South Africans who know even more about U.S. domestic politics sometimes than Americans themselves.
Well, and plus it's summer where you call home, or soon to be summer. Daniel Silke, we appreciate your time coming to visit us here in the United States. Thank you for the update on what is happening in Africa. Now, before we part ways, you might have seen this yesterday if you watched NFL football. Check this out.
Find the word tough for you. Bernie Baudray, our parab bike guy. Timing is everything. Linval Joseph. In the pregame introductions, still at work. This man is tough. Bernie, with a trip to LensCrafters tomorrow.
Yeah, Bernie Baudray, he's doing okay, even though Linval Joseph weighs 329 pounds. Baudray probably did go by LensCrafters to get his glasses fixed. Now, we hope your glasses are all working tomorrow, because this is television. And if they're broken tonight, get them ready for tomorrow, because tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern on America Talks Live, we will have on our political panel former CIA analyst Lisa Ruth and former New York Police Special Investigator Michael Solomon. Psychologist Jill Payne will be here to talk about the aches and pains of post-presidential politics conversation at the Thanksgiving Day table, and of course your phone calls. Then tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern, right here on Newsmax Prime, Liz Peek, Pete Hoekstra, and Paul Boardman. I'll be looking for you then. Until then, stay brave, stay free, stay tuned.